Another Sunday, another loss for the Cleveland Browns. And at this point, nobody is even shocked anymore. What is shocking is how familiar this all feels. A winnable game, a tight score, players fighting until the end. And then the same breakdowns, the same explanations, and the same frustration boiling over everywhere except where it actually needs to. Because if you watched this game closely, you know the final score doesn't explain why fans are this angry. This wasn't a blowout. This wasn't a talent gap. This was another game where the Browns were right there and somehow still walked off the field empty-handed. Again. That's why this loss hit differently. You had Shedeur Sanders battling through pressure, extending plays, taking hits, and refusing to quit. You had players stepping up after injuries, fighting for extra yards and keeping the game within reach. The effort was there. The fight was there. And that's what makes everything else so hard to ignore. Because when the dust settled, the conversation wasn't about effort. It was about decisions, about play calls that left fans shaking their heads, about moments that felt completely avoidable, about answers from Kevin Stefanski that sounded way too familiar for a team that keeps losing the same way. This wasn't just another loss, it felt like another warning sign. Fans aren't just upset about one game. They're questioning the direction. They're questioning accountability. They're questioning why the same mistakes keep showing up while the explanations never seem to change. And once that doubt creeps in, it spreads fast. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When players are clearly fighting and the results still don't change, attention shifts upward. It always does. Suddenly the focus isn't on development or patience. It's on leadership, on structure, on whether this thing can actually be fixed or whether it's time for something drastic. That's why this game mattered more than the record shows. It exposed a growing disconnect between what's happening on the field and what's being said after it. And once fans start feeling that gap, the pressure doesn't ease, it multiplies. And that's exactly where the Browns find themselves right now. This loss felt different, not because the Cleveland Browns lost again, but because of how they lost. The scoreboard says it was close, and that's exactly what made it sting. This wasn't a game where Cleveland was outmatched from the opening kickoff. This was a game they had chances to win, multiple chances, and that's why fans came away angrier than usual. From the opening drive, the Browns showed flashes of what they could be. The offense moved early. The defense bent but didn't completely break. There was energy. There was urgency. For once, it didn't feel like the game was slipping away before halftime. But as the minutes ticked by, familiar cracks started showing, and once you've seen them enough times, you can't ignore them. The biggest frustration wasn't effort. Nobody watching honestly believes the players quit. If anything, the fight on the field made the loss harder to stomach. Shedeur Sanders was extending plays, absorbing pressure, and trying to keep drives alive behind shaky protection. Skilled players were grinding for extra yards. Even after injuries started piling up, the team stayed competitive. That matters. What didn't matter enough? Execution when it counted. A blown opportunity before halftime flipped momentum. Questionable sequencing on offense stalled drives. Situational football, the kind that separates good teams from dysfunctional ones, failed Cleveland again. And when those moments stack up in a one-score game, the loss stops feeling unlucky and starts feeling inevitable. That's why this game exposed more than just a bad afternoon. It highlighted a pattern. Close games keep ending the same way. Late game chances keep slipping away. And the explanations afterward always sound just polished enough to avoid accountability, but never concrete enough to inspire confidence. Fans noticed it immediately. Online reactions weren't about one missed block or one bad snap. They were about structure, about preparation, about why the same issues keep resurfacing no matter who's injured or who's playing. When different players rotate in and the results stay the same, attention naturally shifts away from the roster. This loss didn't just add another mark to the standings. It deepened the sense that something is fundamentally wrong with how games are being managed. Because when a team consistently loses close games, that's rarely about talent alone. It's about decision-making. It's about situational awareness. It's about leadership under pressure. And that's why this loss mattered more than most. It didn't just hurt the Browns' record, it stripped away another layer of belief. Not belief in the players, but belief in the direction. And once that belief starts to crack, the conversation changes fast. This is where frustration really boiled over, because once the game ended, fans didn't just focus on the loss, they focused on what came after it. The press conference, the explanations, the tone. And for a growing part of the fan base, Kevin Stefanski sounded exactly like he has too many times before. The words themselves weren't shocking. That was the problem. Phrases like "we'll look at the tape," "we didn't execute," and "we'll learn from it" have become familiar enough that fans can practically recite them before he says them. On paper, none of it is wrong. Turnovers matter. Missed opportunities matter. Execution matters. But when the same explanations follow the same type of losses, week after week, they start to feel hollow. What fans wanted and didn't hear was ownership. Not just vague responsibility, but clarity. Why did the offense stall after the opening script? Why did the protection break down in critical moments? Why did situational football continue to fail in a one-score game? Instead, the answers felt broad, polished, and nonspecific. And for a team that keeps losing close games, that's gasoline on the fire. The field goal fiasco before halftime became a perfect example. A moment that swung momentum completely. A moment that had nothing to do with talent and everything to do with operation. Yet it was brushed off as an unfortunate breakdown from a unit that been excellent all season. That may be true, but excellence doesn't erase the impact of a mistake that changes the game. Then came the questions about late-game decisions, fourth down aggression, play selection, pass protection on crucial downs. Stefanski defended the process, even as the result fell apart in real time. For some fans, that defense felt disconnected from what they just watched. When a play leaves your quarterback immediately under siege, it's hard to hear that the plan itself was sound. And that's where the trust issue shows up. Fans aren't just upset about losing. They're upset because the explanations don't match the experience of watching the game. They see players fighting through chaos. They see a young quarterback battling through pressure and injury. And then they hear answers that feel detached from that reality. That disconnect is dangerous. Once fans believe the coach doesn't fully acknowledge what's going wrong, patience disappears fast. Online, calls for change grew louder as the press conference went on, not because of one answer, but because of how familiar all of it felt. At this point, it's not about one bad game or one bad quote. It's about credibility. And right now, for a large portion of the Browns fan base, Kevin Stefanski's words are no longer buying him time, they're accelerating the pressure. And when explanations stop landing, the next thing fans start demanding isn't better answers. It's a different voice altogether. Every close loss has a turning point, that single moment where momentum quietly slips away. For the Cleveland Browns, that moment came right before halftime, and it perfectly summed up why this game still has fans furious. The Browns had done enough to stay in control emotionally. They'd weathered pressure, responded to punches, and put themselves in position to steal points heading into the break. Against a team like the Buffalo Bills, that matters. Free points before halftime aren't just points, they're belief. They change how both sidelines walk into the locker room. And then everything unraveled. What should have been a routine field goal turned into chaos. A bad snap, a broken hold, no kick, no points, just confusion. In a one-score game, that sequence wasn't a minor hiccup, it was massive. The Bills walked off the field relieved. The Browns walked off deflated, and you could feel the shift immediately. This wasn't about talent. This wasn't about being outplayed. This was an operational failure. The kind that doesn't show up in highlight packages but absolutely decides games. And when a team struggles the way Cleveland has this season, those moments hit harder because they feel familiar. What made it worse was everything that followed. The Browns didn't come out of halftime with renewed energy, they came out chasing what they just lost. Suddenly, every drive felt heavier. Every mistake felt amplified. The margin for error was gone. And in games like this, once momentum tilts, it rarely comes back without something dramatic. Fans noticed it instantly. Online reactions weren't just angry, they were exhausted. Because this wasn't the first time a small breakdown created a big problem. It was another example of how Cleveland keeps finding new ways to hurt itself in tight games. Different week, same result. That's why this moment stands out more than any single play call or missed assignment. It represented something deeper, a lack of polish in critical situations, a failure to capitalize when the opportunity is right there. And most frustrating of all, it had nothing to do with effort. You can live with being beaten. You can live with talent gaps. What fans struggle to accept is losing games because of moments that feel completely avoidable. Moments where preparation and execution, not luck, decide the outcome. And once that field goal sequence passed, the game felt different. Not unwinnable, just uphill. Like the Browns were once again asking themselves to be perfect after already missing their easiest chance. That's why this moment changed everything. Because in a 3-point loss, those empty seconds before halftime weren't just costly, they were the difference. And for a fan base already on edge, it was the moment that turned frustration into fury. This was the part of the game that quietly changed how a lot of people viewed Shedeur Sanders, even if the final score didn't reflect it. Because while frustration kept building on the sidelines and mistakes piled up around him, Shedeur never checked out. If anything, the chaos seemed to pull more out of him. From the jump, the environment was hostile. Protection broke down early and often. The pocket collapsed faster than plays could develop. And yet, instead of panicking or forcing throws, Shedeur adjusted in real time. He moved. He extended. He bought seconds where none existed, not for highlights but to keep the offense alive. What stood out most was how physical the game became for him. He took hits. He absorbed contact. At one point, he even had to leave briefly with a finger injury. For a young quarterback, that's usually a momentum killer. Timing gets off. Confidence dips. The game speeds up. But when Shedeur came back in, none of that showed. Same demeanor, same urgency, same willingness to stand in and make plays. That resilience didn't go unnoticed, even by Kevin Stefanski, who acknowledged how Shedeur battled and made plays with his feet. And that part matters, because the mobility wasn't reckless scrambling. It was controlled movement, feeling pressure, sliding up, escaping just long enough to turn a loss into a gain or keep a drive alive. Against a disciplined defense like the Buffalo Bills, those plays are rare. They require poise, awareness, and confidence in your own ability to manage chaos. Shedeur showed all three, multiple times. What makes this performance even more telling is the context. This wasn't a clean, supportive environment for a quarterback to grow. This was dysfunction layered on top of adversity, injuries at key positions, missed opportunities, momentum swings that had nothing to do with him. And still, the Browns were competitive deep into the game. That doesn't happen unless the quarterback is holding things together. And yet, despite all of that, the criticism still found its way back to him. Interceptions without context, missed plays without acknowledging pressure, as if the expectation was that he should overcome every breakdown flawlessly. That's not realistic, especially for a young quarterback in this situation. What this game revealed wasn't a finished product. It revealed toughness, mental and physical, the kind that doesn't always show up in stats but shows up in how a team responds when things start going wrong. Shedeur didn't fold, he didn't shrink, he didn't disappear when the game got ugly. He fought through it. And in a season where effort and accountability feel uneven across the organization, that stood out more than anything else on the field. This is where the frustration crossed a line, because when the game tightened and every decision mattered, the play calling left fans stunned. In moments that demanded clarity and protection, the Browns instead leaned into confusion, and the results spoke for themselves. Late in the game, with momentum still within reach, the Cleveland Browns faced a critical fourth down situation. This wasn't desperation time. This was a moment that called for simplicity, leverage, and trust in fundamentals. Instead, the call put Shedeur Sanders in immediate danger. Protection collapsed almost instantly. The route concept took too long to develop, and before Shedeur could even reset his feet, the play was dead. That's not aggression, that's exposure. Fans didn't just criticize the outcome, they questioned the logic. In short yardage situations, the margin for error is razor thin. You either commit to the run with numbers, or you design a quick, decisive concept that protects your quarterback. What happened instead looked like neither. No clear escape valve. No extra help in protection. Just a long-developing idea against a defense that thrives on pressure like the Buffalo Bills. What made it worse was the response afterward. Kevin Stefanski defended the process, said he liked the call, said the team needed to be aggressive to win games like this. And while aggression has its place, fans weren't buying that explanation. Because aggression without structure isn't bold, it's reckless. Online, the reaction was immediate. Clips circulated showing missed blocks and blown assignments. Commentators slowed the play down frame by frame, pointing out how Shedeur never had a real chance. Some fans went as far as calling it sabotage, not as a factual claim, but as an expression of how disconnected the decision felt from the reality on the field. When a play gives your quarterback no path to success, people start asking uncomfortable questions. This wasn't an isolated incident either. Throughout the game, once the opening script ended, the offense struggled to stay coherent. Drives stalled. Sequencing felt disjointed. Adjustments came late, if at all. And in big moments, instead of leaning into what was working, the Browns pivoted away from it. That's why this section of the game mattered so much. Not because one call failed, but because it symbolized a larger issue. When players are fighting, extending plays, and keeping games close, the play calling has to meet that effort halfway. It didn't. And when that gap between effort and decision-making becomes obvious, trust erodes fast. Because in the NFL, close games are often decided by one or two moments. And in this one, the Browns didn't just lose those moments, they gave them away. This is the stage every struggling franchise eventually reaches, and the Cleveland Browns are clearly there now. When losses keep piling up and fans stop believing coaching changes alone will fix things, the spotlight moves higher, much higher, right to ownership. After this game, the noise wasn't just about play calling or late-game execution anymore. It was about direction, about accountability, and about whether Jimmy Haslam is willing to step in and make a real decision instead of another half measure. Fans have seen this movie before. Close losses explained away, coaches defending process, promising moments wiped out by the same mistakes. And each time, the reset button gets pushed just enough to buy time, but never enough to actually change the outcome. That's why this loss felt like more than just another mark in the standings. It felt like a referendum. Online, the conversation shifted fast. Not just fire the coach, but how is this still acceptable? People started questioning the structure itself. Why does the team look unprepared in critical moments year after year? Why do situational breakdowns survive roster changes, quarterback changes, and coordinator changes? At some point, those questions stop pointing at the sideline and start pointing at the top. What's fueling this pressure is the contrast. Fans are watching players, especially young ones, fight through chaos, take hits, play through injuries, and still compete. And then they see an organization that feels slow to react when things clearly aren't working. That disconnect is what erodes trust the fastest. There's also growing speculation among fans that ownership has been too patient in moments where urgency was required. That's not an accusation, it's a perception. But perception matters. When supporters believe the standard is survival instead of success, frustration turns into apathy. And apathy is the last thing any franchise wants. This is why calls for Haslem to blow it up are getting louder. Not necessarily because fans want chaos, but because they're tired of cycles. New faces, same problems. Different seasons, identical endings. Close but not close enough. Ownership sets the tone for everything beneath it. Culture, accountability, expectations. And right now, a large portion of the fan base feels like that tone is unclear. They're not asking for perfection. They're asking for direction. Because when a team keeps losing the same way, year after year, it stops feeling unlucky. It starts feeling intentional, or at least tolerated. And once fans reach that conclusion, the pressure doesn't fade. It compounds. This game didn't just raise questions about coaching. It raised questions about leadership at the highest level. And until those questions are answered with action, not words, every close loss will feel heavier than the last. That's the position the Browns are in now, not just fighting opponents, but fighting doubt about where this organization is actually headed. When you step back from the noise, this game wasn't just another loss on the schedule. It was a snapshot of where the Cleveland Browns are right now, caught between effort and execution, between development and dysfunction, between believing in the future and being tired of the present. On one side of that crossroads is a young quarterback in Shedeur who is clearly growing in real time. He's taking hits, learning from mistakes, adjusting his game, and still competing when things around him fall apart. That matters. Not every improvement shows up cleanly on a stat sheet, but it shows up on tape. It shows up in resilience. It shows up in how a player responds when the game doesn't go his way. And in this one, Shedeur didn't fold, he fought. On the other side is an organization struggling to translate that effort into results. The same situational issues keep resurfacing. The same late-game breakdowns keep deciding close losses. And the same explanations keep following them afterward. That's where belief starts to crack. Not because fans expect perfection, but because they expect progress at the team level, not just from individual players. This is why the spotlight feels heavier now on Kevin Stefanski and the leadership structure above him. At some point, development at quarterback has to be matched by stability everywhere else. Clean operations, clear play calling identity, situational awareness when the margins are thin. Without that, even the most promising pieces get dragged into the same cycle. And that's the danger moment. Because when fans start saying, "We've seen this before," patience runs out quickly. Close losses stop feeling encouraging. Moral victories stop mattering. Every mistake feels louder. Every explanation feels smaller. That's when pressure turns into demands. The Browns aren't talentless. They aren't lifeless. And that's what makes this so frustrating. The fight is there. The flashes are there. The building blocks are there. What's missing is alignment, everyone pulling in the same direction when it matters most. So this really is a crossroads. One path leads to hard decisions, accountability, and a commitment to fixing what keeps breaking in critical moments. The other leads to more of the same, competitive losses, familiar press conferences, and growing doubt. The outcome of this season may already be written in the standings, but the future of this team is not yet. What happens next will tell everyone whether the Browns are serious about turning effort into wins, or whether they're content letting potential sit stuck in neutral. And that's the part no one can ignore anymore.